Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining myself. I'm Liz Wooten. I am the president and CEO of Connect for More, a consulting and coaching firm based out of Tampa, Florida. I am so pleased to have a good friend and great colleague with us today to talk a little bit more about his effort, his new book, and also the title of Courage and Connection. So really excited. So Hardy, welcome.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate an opportunity to visit with you and share a little bit about the Hardy journey.
The Hardy journey. Speaking of, our number one question for folks is always your leadership journey. What has that journey looked like for you? What events, what people, what connections led you where you are today?
So is this a single episode or is this a series that's going to go for a while?
Because we could probably do a series, but yeah, let's think about what I tell when I'm facilitating. Keep it in like 2 minutes or less.
Liz, I would share that my list of lived experiences and the Hardy journey has been a lot of fun. It's been very interesting. The reason it's been a lot of fun and very interesting and a little bit challenging along the way is because I've been afforded so many amazingly wonderful opportunities by a lot of special people. And I've had opportunities that especially at an age much younger than what I am now, that most people don't get, or they have to wait until much later in life. So the opportunities that have come my way and presented themselves have been made to happen by a lot of great individuals and lots of people who've kind of supported Hardy kind of moving along and getting involved in things. In a good bit of that journey happened or started in my hometown of Talladega, Alabama, and where I can say I'm really the old story about the village and raising the child. I was one of those children that the village helped raise. Now they probably thought we better get our arms around this kid or there's going to be trouble. So a lot of benefits there. And then fast forward to a 30-year career in the high performance world of NASCAR racing and opportunities to do things there that, again, not many people ever get a chance to do and be around people that not many people get a chance to be around. And so the leadership lessons and the leadership experiences that I had in NASCAR world are what I bring now to my work with nonprofits, associations, and chambers of commerce. So those lessons are a little bit unique, a little bit different. I'm, I guess, trained to think differently. I'm trained to ask challenging questions, be a little bit of a contrarian from time to time, and also have a little bit of fun with it.
Awesome.
So that's kind of a quick wrap up of what the journey has looked like.
Well, I love that. And thank you for sharing, that NASCAR perspective. But as a parent and as a former educator, I always appreciate that reference to it takes a village. And I think particularly when we're talking about connection and how it's impacted your work, I'd love to hear some of those influential connections that did impact your service now with nonprofit organizations and chambers, but also, how you have learned to define courage and perhaps even how you define courage.
Well, I think so. Here's maybe a 2 or 3 or 4 for one answer to one question. Along the way, it was certainly a great opportunity and privilege to me to work for the Bill France family, which founded and owned NASCAR. And I had an opportunity in my work with NASCAR to work for Bill France Jr. and a lot of people directly for Bill. And a lot of people ask, well, what's the the best lesson you ever got from working in that arena? And I said, oh, that's easy. And Bill taught me to anticipate.
Mm.
And he said, anticipate, recognize your problems in advance and get the solutions. As a matter of fact, Liz, my job description mandate was to do exactly that. And that was identify problems before they happened and make sure they didn't happen.
Wow.
And by any chance, if I slipped up and the problem did occur, then I wasn't doing my job, but I could somewhat redeem myself by making sure it got fixed and fixed in a hurry. So translating that to the world of nonprofits and associations, a whole lot of what nonprofits do is following the rinse and repeat of best practices. Well, a good friend of mine, Stephen Shapiro, wrote a very successful book. And the name of the book was Our Best Practices Stupid. Well, with Steve's permission and his his cooperation, I retitled that and for speaking and training and writing purposes. So now I use Our Nonprofit Best Practices Stupid.
Mm.
So a little bit of a tongue in cheek, but what happens is we've decided, okay, this is what everybody else does. And so we are just gonna do it that way. And it's kind of that, oh, why are you doing this? Oh, well, it's because that's the way we've always done it. So getting into your question about how has that impacted my work? What's the definition of courage? I think the way I've utilized that and my definition of courage for nonprofits and boards especially is courage is being willing to recognize what you're doing isn't working and
Mm.
recognizing that change is going to happen and it's going to happen continuously. There are different reasons for change. We've all been through a pretty significant period of change and challenge, but there was change and challenge before that, and there's going to be change and challenge after COVID pandemic. So there's always going to be something. So organizations, nonprofits especially, have got to be willing to change. They've got to be willing to adapt. And Liz, what makes that difficult is anytime you're talking about change and adapting, what it gets down to is changing behavior. And that's not, as humans, that's not an easy thing for us to do. It's quite often not an easy conversation to have. And doing something differently than has been done before you and previously. So that's my definition of courage for the nonprofit sector. Those organizations who are willing to think differently and act differently in the face of what everyone else is doing, but making sure they're taking care of themselves, creating sustainability for themselves, moving forward to whatever the future may hold.
Well, and it's interesting you say the word change because I think change in so many nonprofit boardrooms feels like a threat or it feels like uncertainty, undesired. And, as you referenced the last 2 years, as we film in the spring of 2022, I mean, there's been no option for change. We have had to learn to figure this out. And so that idea of courage, of admitting when you've tried something that quite frankly didn't work, or, and this is probably a least favorite word than change, failed. And as a board, being willing to say, okay, what lessons did we learn and where do we go from here? So I think that's a really important point, Hardy. As you talk about, change, one of the things that we found at the Connect for More team is that boards of directors or even staff and board working together are not as connected as they could be. So In your experience, what do you think, or why do you think board leaders are struggling with connecting so much with one another and with staff as well?
Well, that's really a great question, and somewhat of a commercial plug for my book. That's what the whole "Stop the Nonprofit Board Blame" game is based on. So, but the to get it into a maybe a soundbite type answer, but there's a whole lot behind all of this. It's nonprofits, their boards, and then the nonprofits and their boards. And when I say nonprofits, I'm talking people, the staff. I think all too often, this relates to my previous comments, we're caught, Liz, in a repeating, recurring cycle
Mm.
of board relationship mistakes. There's a reason why that two individuals enter into a life partnership, and then after a while it doesn't work out. Well, how often do those two individuals separate, and for whatever the reason might be, and then as they go down the life path, and then they each individual meets new other people that they want to get into a long-term commitment, a long-term relationship with. And then after a while, what happens? It's the same result as the first time around. So a lot of times, anyone who has been involved in relationships and relationship therapy, it's very rare that two individuals who are struggling in their relationship, it's very rare that it's 100% one-sided.
Mm.
There's probably something that each of those two individuals have contributed to the relationship not working out like they had hoped for in the beginning. That's the same thing with nonprofit boards, their staff members, and the nonprofits. So there is my experience and research shows me, I've been on a quest to answer the question, why don't board members do what they're supposed to do? Well, look, I've found the answers. And a whole lot of that is because nonprofits continue to make the same relationship mistakes with their board members.
Mm.
And that's why it's so difficult to build that culture of connection that you're asking about.
Well, and as you said, that repetition of the same relationship missteps or mistakes. I mean, whether it's in a marriage, a friendship, a relationship, or a board service partnership, I often find that a lot of our boards, particularly nonprofit boards, do not take the time to do the work that it requires to keep the spark alive, as it were. So, thinking to that, what are a few tips, without giving away your whole book, what are a few tips that you could give us from that perspective that would help our next right steps as we think about how do we keep our board members engaged, but also what is our role as a nonprofit staffer or as a board chair? What is our role in that process? What do you have for suggestions for us?
Well, some quick tips for both board chair, and I appreciate the way you frame that, both the board chair and the staff involved with the interaction with the board itself. So, and I would encourage our listeners to write these down. Get your notepad, get your iPad, type on the phone. But number one is absolutely get clarity on expectations. This is
Mm.
where we fall down. We don't do a good enough job explaining to a board candidate, a board prospect, what the heck exactly is it that we expect that prospect, that individual to do. In large part, without getting too much, having too much of a reveal here, but in going too deep with the time that we have, in large part, we don't bring clarity to the board recruiting conversation because we're afraid that individual will tell us no.
Mm,
And because we haven't approached board recruiting with intentionality, we're not working in advance. We're really working at the last minute. And if we can't get Liz, well, I mean, she could be a great board member, but if we don't get Liz, who else are we going to get? So if we tell Liz, here's all these things we want you to do, Liz says, whoo, gosh, great cause, great nonprofit. I am way over committed and I just have to say no, respectfully say no. Wow, now we have nobody. So let's don't tell Liz. Let's just let her know about all the fundraising we want her to do. Let's let her know about the checks we want her to write after we get her to the altar and after she says, I do.
mm.
Well, back to the relationship situation, how often does it work out when you say, look, I got things I expect out of this relationship, but I'll explain them later after I get that commitment? How often does that really work out?
Right. Talk
Not
about a
often.
switcheroo.
Another part of the getting clarity on expectations is, as a nonprofit, it's so critical, Liz, to listen to what your board candidates' expectations are. So between the two of you in this conversation, it's really important to listen and stop talking and listen. So it's quite possible that a very good board candidate has a different mindset as far as expectations go, what they're willing to do, and they just, sometimes no can be the best answer in the recruiting process. The best answer for them, the best answer for you. So number one, get clarity on expectations. And number two is be intentional with board recruiting.
Mm,
Know what it is that you want your board member and what's your ideal board member bring to the table. And then whether it's experience, whether it's characteristics, are they going to be a good fit? The skills, the talents, what is it that they're going to bring to the table? The ideal board member, and then who? So who are those people? So if you want to build a championship baseball team, for example, you have to have a top rated pitcher. Well, you don't need 10 first basemen. You need some good pitchers. So concentrate on getting the pitchers that you need. So be intentional with recruiting. Number three, real quickly, is communicate effectively. The number one, my research shows, so my nonprofit research with nonprofit board shows me, and my start, I'm a little bit slow on the uptake, but the research involved with 48 years of marriage to the same individual has shown me that communicating effectively is critically important in a good, maintaining a positive relationship. And it's not the amount of communication, but it's the quality of communication. And it's so important to recognize that it is individuals. As staff, you're working really hard to crank out the reports, to crank out the minutes. But do you know how your board members individually want to receive and process information and data? So you may be turning off board members instead of turning them on because of all your great reports. So, but communicating effectively is a number one critical issue in maintaining good relationships. Another item is create a positive board experience for your board members. are your board meetings a cannot miss this meeting at all cost? I want to attend. It's going to be dynamic. I'm engaged. I get to have conversation. I get to participate in the meetings. There's going to be some social interaction time when I get to see my good friend Liz, and we get to share and talk about what our kids are doing, and just having some good social interaction time. That's so important. Or are your board meeting situations, well, you know what? I've got three other things I can do. They're not going to listen to me. They don't want to hear what I have to say. There's no time for social interaction. I'm not going to, it's just really a waste of time. Nothing's getting, so I'm blowing it off. So all of a sudden, that opportunity to create a culture where your board members really want to be a part of what's going on, you can either build it or you can just watch it fall apart. And then the last one, this is so important, Liz. In nonprofit, or excuse me, volunteer 101 is thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So you can't say thank you. You can't show appreciation enough. And it's one thing, again, in relationships, I've learned it's one thing to tell my wife how I feel about her, but it's a little bit more important to show her, right? So what are those signs of appreciation? So how can you show your board members that you appreciate their commitment, appreciate their passion, appreciate their time, the recognition of the difference that they're making? And also tie directly into your question about creating a culture of commitment and a culture of performance, Liz. Recognize the performance that you want to have followed. So if a board member is doing a great job interacting in meetings, asking good questions, being engaged, being collegial with their other fellow board members, recognize that behavior. It's just like your kids or your pets. I mean, you recognize the behavior that you want them to follow, right? So those are 5 quick tips that will help build a good, positive, productive board culture.
I mean, at the risk of sounding trite, like governance gold, Hardy, really. I mean, governance gold about those 5. And the idea, as you said, of, holding one another accountable like any good partnership and serving as a sounding board. And so many great nuggets there about the intentionality of the recruiting process, being willing to be clear about what those expectations are, actually listening to what a board member wants to do. And then I love that positive experience. Nobody wants to go to, number one, a boring meeting or a contentious meeting, or just, a quick hour of, down and dirty data. But it's an opportunity, as you said, to show appreciation and communicate with folks the way they want to be communicated with. So Hardy, I know, and I've put the book up here and I'll share it with our folks too. This is an incredible resource, and we are so really pleased and proud that you put this book out this year, because you and I have had conversations for many years now about nonprofit governance. So how can we continue to support you? What's up next for Hardy? I know there's a lot on the book tour agenda, but how else can we support and share your work with our nonprofit leadership community?
Well, thank you, Liz. What's next for me for the foreseeable future for a while, in a very good way, is working with organizations to help break the cycle of frustrating board relationships so they can indeed benefit from fully engaged boards. And so that's my mission, and that's what I'm wanting to achieve. And how can you best support? Well, just encourage the nonprofit connections that you have to buy a copy of the book and benefit from the lessons and the messages that it offers. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Well, Hardy, I really, really appreciate your time. And as always, the conversation and connection that we have. But I also appreciate you being willing to talk about courage. I know courage is not always an easy and accessible topic for so many of us who are in that subject matter expertise sphere. And so I appreciate your willingness to show up and talk to us about that
Certainly.
today as well.